tardes. Good afternoon. Good evening.
Oh, really?
Welcome to the House of Spain. We have a wonderful program today and two wonderful historians. I'm considered a historian, maybe there's something else, but Dr. Scott Dale from Marquette University and Dr. Ray Astley, friend of all of us. I think all of us know Ray Astley from the Maritime Museum, and they're going to be talking about the history of the Spanish culture in the 21st century, and specifically about symbolism. So with that, I'll introduce Dr. Scott Dale. Scott?
Thank you. Thank you. Well, thank you everybody for coming out tonight. Just to start, I will say that this little talk is really just the appetizer to Ray Ashley. He's the main course. So I'm just going to float some topics out there, but we're going to listen to Ray later. So yeah, thank you for coming out. I thought this would be a great topic because I hear a lot of people in my field talking about some of these issues. So my name is Scott Dale, as Jesus has said, and I'd like to briefly highlight how cultural symbols of Spain's legacy in California probably mean more different things than we imagine. So for example, why are we here tonight? Well, I'd like to think that we're here to discuss the slippery nature of cultural symbols and figures in Spanish history. I know we have some great empanadas later, but I'd like to think that we're here to talk about these slippery symbols.
Yes, we are.
For example, in academia in my field, sometimes I get asked, who cares about Columbus Day? Isn't it really Indigenous Peoples Day? Or why bother discussing Cabrillo's national origin? Who cares? Or why suggest that the origins of the dollar symbol are Spanish when we can actually encounter many Americans who would believe that this is a United States symbol? I'm even asked, why talk about Spanish Catholic churches when so few people go to Mass nowadays? The reality is, in my opinion, that all of these cultural symbols that we'll look at tonight are tremendously relevant to our world today. Cultural symbols, in all cultures, are powerful representations of a society's values, beliefs, and traditions. Think of the Statue of Liberty. These types of symbols in our country have the ability to evoke emotions and create a sense of identity among individuals. However, it is important to acknowledge that cultural symbols can also mean different things for different people. One reason why cultural symbols have diverse meanings is due to the influence of personal experiences. Each individual has unique life experiences that shape their perception of the world. For example, the California flag may represent freedom and pride for me, while for somebody from a different country, for example Mexico, it might symbolize something else like oppression or conflict. One symbol, but with various interpretations. These different interpretations arise from personal histories and the context in which individuals have encountered these symbols. The California flag is also monetized on t-shirts, hats, backpacks, etc. But this symbol is a slippery one for some on the other side of California history. Cultural symbols can also be interpreted differently across generations. Think of President George W. Bush and how our younger generation today views him. His legacy has changed a lot in that short period of time. As time progresses, societal norms change, and so do the meanings attached to certain symbols. Furthermore, cultural diversity plays a significant role in shaping how people interpret symbols. Different cultures have distinct values and traditions that influence their understanding of various symbols. What may be considered sacred in one culture, the California flag, might be seen as offensive in another. In short, cultural symbols hold immense significance, but should not be assumed to carry universal meaning. Personal experiences, generational gaps, and cultural diversity all contribute to varying interpretations of these symbols. Cultural symbols of the past, such as the California flag, the Statue of Liberty, and our past presidents, are indeed slippery and mean different things today. As time progresses, societies evolve, values change, and interpretations of symbols shift. Symbols such as flags, monuments, or even language can also hold deep historical significance. Their meanings can be redefined over time due to social progress or shifts in power dynamics. Here's an edgy symbol. For example, the Confederate flag in the United States was once seen as a symbol of Southern pride, but is now widely associated with racism and oppression. Moreover, cultural symbols can also be appropriated by different groups for various purposes. Of course, we know the worst example, the swastika, is a prime example of this. Originally an ancient religious symbol representing well-being and good fortune in many cultures, it was later reappropriated, adopted by the Nazis, and forever tainted with their atrocities. In today's interconnected world, it is crucial to approach cultural symbols with sensitivity and open-mindedness. We must acknowledge that our understanding of these symbols, such as the Confederate flag, will never be static. They will continue to evolve alongside our societies. In short, cultural symbols of the past are slippery and mean different things today due to evolving societal values and changing interpretations. These symbols play a crucial role in representing the identity of a nation, such as Spain. Spain, a country rich in history and culture, possesses powerful symbols that encapsulate its unique identity. From the majestic bull to the passionate flamenco dance, these symbols embody the essence of Spain and evoke a sense of pride amongst its people. One of the most iconic symbols of Spain is the bull, El Toro Bravo. While controversial, bullfighting has been an integral part of Spanish culture for centuries. It represents bravery, courage, in facing challenges head-on. For centuries, bulls have been an integral part of Spanish culture, symbolizing strength, power, bravery, and many more. The bullfighting tradition has deep roots in Spanish history and continues to be celebrated as an art form. The image of a torero facing a charging bull represents not only physical courage, artistry, and finesse, but also the indomitable spirit that defines Spain. However, in recent years, we have now seen younger generations protest celebrations of bulls and bull-related events. For example, the Corrida de Toros. The debate surrounding bullfighting reflects the ongoing struggle between tradition and progress in Spanish society. Another symbol that represents Spanish identity is the flamenco. This passionate and rhythmic dance form originated in Andalusia and has since become synonymous with Spanish culture. Flamenco embodies intense emotions such as love, pain, joy, sorrow, all elements that are deeply ingrained in Spanish society. While it is often associated with passion and sensuality, it also represents resilience and strength. The intricate footwork and emotional expressions convey a sense of determination in overcoming adversity. However, many Spaniards in the 20th century, and even back as far as late 19th century, also associated flamenco with the ostracized gypsy population and seedy urban areas. While many view it as an expression of passion and cultural pride, others may see it as reinforcing stereotypes or excluding certain groups from participation. Another iconic symbol in Spain is the famous Gaudí architecture, such as the Sagrada Familia in Barcelona. This is yet another symbol that holds various interpretations. The unique blend of Gothic and Art Nouveau styles showcases Spain's modern artistic prowess, while also reflecting its powerful historical influences. Spain's national flag, with its vibrant red and yellow stripes, is another powerful symbol that unites Spaniards across regions. It represents their shared history, values, and aspirations. However, Spain's national flag might also suggest a form of conservative nationalism. The Spanish flag can evoke different emotions depending on who you ask. For some, it represents unity and patriotism, while for others, it may be a reminder of Spain's political divisions. It's funny, it seems like today, the Spanish flag almost suggests both unity and division. These different interpretations highlight the complexities of national identity in a diverse country like Spain. All these symbols that we've seen serve as reminders of Spain's rich heritage and cultural diversity. They evoke feelings of unity among Spaniards while also showcasing their unique traditions to the world. Symbols hold immense power in representing a nation's identity. The bullfighting tradition, flamenco dance art form, Gaudi's architecture, the national flag, these are just a few of the examples of how Spain's symbols encapsulate its distinct cultural heritage. These powerful representations instill pride among Spaniards while captivating outsiders with their beauty and significance. However, these same symbols can also mean very different things for different people. Bulls, for example, can mean bravery for me, but they might mean suffering for you. Flamenco might mean intense emotion for you, but might mean a marginalized community for me. And the Spanish flag might mean unity during the World Cup, but also might mean conservative nationalism for somebody else. In conclusion, the symbols of Spain have multifaceted meanings that extend beyond their initial impressions. They represent not only cultural traditions, but also resilience, bravery, and artistic expression. By understanding these symbols on a deeper level, we can gain a greater appreciation for Spanish culture as a whole. Symbols of Spain can have multiple interpretations depending on one's background, values, and experiences. Recognizing this diversity of viewpoints allows for meaningful dialogue and promotes empathy among individuals with differing opinions. Now, as Dr. Ray Ashley will mention in just a few moments, 16th century Spain is a period in history that continues to be interpreted in many different ways. This era was marked by significant events, such as the exploration and colonization of the New World, the Spanish Inquisition, and the rise of the Spanish Empire. These events have shaped Spain's history and left a lasting impact on its culture, politics, and society, as well as a large footprint right here in California. One interpretation of 16th century Spain is that it was a golden age of exploration and conquest. During this time, Spanish explorers like Cristobal Colon discovered new lands and established colonies across the Americas. This interpretation highlights Spain's role as a global superpower and emphasizes its contributions in world history. However, another interpretation that we might see in schools today could suggest that 16th century Spain was a period of religious intolerance and oppression. The Spanish Inquisition targeted Jews, Muslims, and other non-Christians, leading to their expulsion or forced conversion. This perspective emphasizes the dark side of Spain's history during that time. Furthermore, some interpretations focus on Spain's cultural achievements during this era. This might look familiar, Jesus. The Renaissance flourished in Spain, and artists like El Greco producing masterpieces that are still admired today. This beautiful work by El Greco, called El Entierro del Conde de Orgaz, painted in 1586, is still on display in Jesus' hometown of Toledo. Additionally, Spanish literature of the 16th and 17th centuries thrived with renowned writers such as Garcilaso de la Vega, Lope de Vega, Tirso de Molina, Francisco de Quevedo, Calderón de la Barca, and of course the greatest novelist, Miguel de Cervantes, who imagined the iconic, equally slippery figure of Don Quixote. One of the most profound questions that torments us when we read Don Quixote is, what is real? What is reality? Do I really exist? Is this all a dream? Is Sancho Panza a representation of reality? Or is reality what we can imagine? For example, if Don Quixote can imagine his princess Dulcinea in his own mind, why can't she also be considered a form of reality? In a word, 16th century Spain is interpreted in many different ways today due to its complex history. It can be seen as an era of exploration and conquest, or one marked by religious intolerance and oppression. Additionally, its cultural achievements cannot be overlooked. Understanding these various interpretations allow us to gain a more comprehensive understanding of this crucial period in Spanish history. In a word, cultural symbols of Spain are often slippery. but also powerful tools that have the ability to convey deep meanings and evoke strong emotions. However, as time passes, interpretations of symbols can also change and evolve. People today have different interpretations of these symbols due to various factors such as cultural shifts, historical context, and personal experiences. One reason for the diverse interpretations is the changing cultural landscape. Societies become more inclusive and diverse, leading to a greater understanding and appreciation of different perspectives. Symbols that were once seen as representative of Spanish power and dominance may now be viewed through a different lens of colonialism and oppression by marginalized communities. Furthermore, historical context plays a crucial role in shaping interpretations. The 16th century was marked by significant events such as the Spanish Inquisition and colonization efforts in the Americas. These events have left lasting impacts on how symbols from that area are perceived today. For example, when we talked about the Spanish flag, now this may be seen as a symbol of conquest, while others may interpret it as a representation of national pride. Lastly, personal experiences greatly influence how individuals interpret these symbols. Someone with Spanish ancestry might view all of these symbols with nostalgia or pride, their heritage, while someone from an indigenous background might see them as something very different. People today have different interpretations of symbols from 16th century Spain due to changing cultural landscape, historical context, and personal experiences. In conclusion, and as we will now hear from Dr. Ray Ashley, ships from Spain are also complicated symbols. I never thought about that until I started reading Dr. Ashley's writings. These represent rich history that has shaped our world today. These vessels carry with them tales of exploration, conquest, and cultural exchange. They serve as a reminder of the complex relationship between Spain and the rest of the world. Spanish ships, and we got these great props right here behind me, were not only instruments of power, but also vehicles for cultural exchange, bringing new ideas, goods, and people across continents. The symbol of the ship reminds us of humanity's thirst for exploration, and by acknowledging the complicated history associated with ships, we can also learn valuable lessons about our shared heritage while striving towards a more inclusive future where diversity is celebrated rather than marginalized. So thank you very much, and now I'd like to introduce Dr. Ray Ashley. Thank you. I think really yours is the main course and mine's just sort of the after dinner drink is what it comes to. But thank you so much. That was really a perfect introduction about the role of symbols and how they're interwoven in our lives. And so I'm just going to tell a story, or a couple of them here. I was listening to this show on NPR once called Hidden Brain, and the subject was about people that had had, by accident, the nerve bundle between their two hemispheres of the brain severed, the corpus callosum, and what happened to them, and then had it reestablished. So it was when it was reestablished, and people could say what it was like to have experienced that, because it was incredibly disruptive to their behavior in their lives. They said it was the most terrifying thing imaginable. And one of the reasons why it was the most terrifying thing imaginable was they said they lost their capacity for narrative, for story. Consequently, they didn't know who they were, where they were, or what was about to happen to them. That explained the sort of schizophrenic behavior that these people were engaged in. And so we use these stories, and we populate the stories with symbols to actually help us navigate our way through, the difficult question of who we are, much like Don Quixote did. So this story here that I'm going to tell really starts with another anecdote. I first gave this talk at the only other time I gave it was at a conference at the Council of American Maritime Museums. So these were all maritime museums, and a lot of them were also tall ship organizations. And one of the people that's been going to these things for years and years, Nancy Richardson, is this delightful grandmotherly lady with an irrepressible enthusiasm for sailing on tall ships. And she herself, as a young girl, sailed around the world on the schooner Yankee with Irving and Essie Johnson. It was so transformative, it changed her life. She devoted her whole life to it. And she's been on more tall ships than anybody else I can think of, including the one back there, the one Sebastian Darcano, which she sailed on for thousands of miles. So she was at a conference called the Ocean Educators Conference
and she was listening to a talk given by some indigenous people about how they were trying to reconnect with the water. I'm not sure what tribe it was or where it was, but all the programs and things they were doing, because in the course of history, their particular tribe had been cut off from its traditional sources of water, and they were trying to reintegrate themselves with this source of history and identity. Much like there is a Kumeyaay group called Native Like Water that we've been working with to do the same thing. Well, Nancy was really moved by this talk and went up to them later and said, you know, there's a really good way to do this. We could just get your groups together with tall ships. You know, we can provide these tall ship experiences to all these young, young Indian kids to go out and do this. The response she got was a look of total horror and saying, we don't want anything to do with you because those things represent everything bad that happened to us. We just want you to go away. We want nothing to do with you. We don't like you. And Nancy, I think this is the first time anybody in her life had ever given her a negative response because she's so uniformly positive. So that kind of got me thinking that a lot of these symbols that we do take for granted and that we assume have only a positive connotation, they don't always do that. And so navigating our way through these things is a difficult process. And it's something that we, face daily. So I know many of you have been there to the San Diego Maritime Museum. Raise your hand if you've been there, right? All right, perfect. Those of you who hadn't, I hope you're feeling really, really chagrined by now, so you have to remedy that. Well, there are all these ships. They represent about 500 years of history. And they are these powerful symbols of different times in our history and how those ships facilitated it, what they did, and the stories they invoke. But this one in particular is this ship here, which our museum built, the San Salvador. We did it because if that picture I showed you, if it's a real sequence, if it's a narrative in which all these things are connected, it seemed to us that really you need the first chapter to make sense of that. So the San Salvador has become, long before we ever considered it, effectively the repository of what we call origin stories, right? And it's been that way for California for a long time. For instance, the seal of the city of San Diego, which looks much like the symbols that Dr. Dale was showing earlier, at the middle of it is this ship, the San Salvador, right? The identity piece. If you go onto Google and you type in the word Cabrillo, the explorer associated with San Salvador, you can amuse yourself for hours and hours with all the things named Cabrillo in California. As far as we can tell, there are approximately 1.5 million places in California with Cabrillo's name on it. It is by far the most popular place name in California and one of the most popular in the world. I mean, there's hospitals and schools and elementary schools and parks and freeways and launching ramps. You almost can't find a place without Cabrillo's name on it somewhere. And this is kind of the modern day internet expression of an origin story and the symbols that convey that story. When you drove into Balboa Park today, you might have seen this tower, the Tower of California. Up at the top of that tower for more than a century is that ship, the San Salvador. Right? If you go into City Hall, the community concourse at City Hall, you see this mural on the ground outside. San Diego Bay, 1542, San Salvador sailing into the bay. There have been postage stamps of this as national stamps with Cabrillo and the ship in the background, and of course on Point Loma itself, the statue of Cabrillo and the monument itself, Cabrillo National Monument. It's a monument. So all of these things are representations of something we like to tell ourselves about ourselves, that our story, and it's true not just for people of Spanish heritage, it's for all Californians and San Diegans, that this is where we're supposed to think we started to begin to become who we are now. That's the basis of an origin story. And you see huge projections of that everywhere, in the architecture, in the style of building, even in the plants and things around. They're all supposed to remind us of that. And so consequently, it's important to think about the people that might not view this as an origin story, that it's not their origin story. And in fact, there is a story that goes back thousands of years before this particular story began. And the very notion of it being an origin story to their sense of identity might seem rather offensive. So to go back into that and talk about this Cabrillo himself, we're not going to talk about where he was born except for me to say, yep, he was Spanish, we know that now, so there you go. Thank you. In any case, he came to the New World as a young man. He participated in the conquest of Cuba under Velasquez, and then was sent to New Spain in the army of Panfilo Narvaez to actually apprehend Hernan Cortez and bring him back. He had exceeded his orders, and he was absorbed into Cortez's army after those two Spanish armies confronted one another. And he must have had some experience building ships or associated with marine technology, because it said in the conquest of New Spain by Hernandez that he helped build the fleet of Brigantinas, or small armed craft, that allowed Cortez to launch his amphibious attack across Lake Texcoco. And the story of conquest and the violence associated with it tends to dominate that narrative, and has ended up be symbolizing the entire episode and the entire scope and scale of this enormous tragedy, when in fact the violence was probably only a very small portion of the tragedy that was about to unfold. In 1500, the population of the Americas was probably about 50 million people. It was about a fourth the population of the whole world. The largest cities in the Americas were larger than any cities in Europe or Asia. There was a huge diversity of cultures, ranging from people that lived in the forests of the Amazon all the way to these highly complex hierarchical civilizations. And they occupied huge ranges of territories, and many of them were oblivious to one another, much less any knowledge of the outside world beyond the Americas. And by 1610 or so, the apogee of decline, or not the apogee, the bottom of the trough of the decline in population, by that time in 1610, approximately 90% of those, of what was about 50 million people were wiped out. There were about 5 million indigenous peoples living in the Americas. Not because of violence primarily, but because of contact and the spread of diseases to which they had no immunity. Most of them died without ever laying eyes on a European. So it wasn't intentional, but that doesn't make it less tragic. We ourselves have come through a pandemic on a much, much smaller scale, so we get some grasp of what that was like, and we are still, 500 years later, traumatized by the Black Plague, because that was probably spread by maritime commerce as well. It's estimated perhaps 40% of the population of Europe was wiped out by the Black Plague in the 14th century, and the several incursions of it, and it had enormous impacts on society. Their entire languages ceased to exist, national boundaries changed. It was a huge deal. Well, you can imagine with that kind of effect that we're still kind of feeling in some ways, half a millennium later, what this kind of thing would have been. It was a human tragedy of unparalleled scale and horror that beset these people. And so that's the backdrop to that. And it's difficult, in fact, it's just difficult to perceive how difficult it would be. And that context of that legacy and the symbols associated with it, it existed when we began to drop our own symbols into the middle of it without really being prepared for the scale of the response. Initially, the response wasn't bad at all. This was the keel laying ceremony of San Salvador. The event was blessed by the top matriarchal figure among the Kumeyaay, Jane Dumas. We had the tribal elders that blessed the ship and blessed the laying of the keel. And then one of them, the tribal chairman, gave this, if I can manage to get this going here, gave this as part of the speech.
And people were the first ones to see the spaceship on the horizon, so to speak. We all understand that the first meetings throughout this country between your ancestors and mine was a tragic one. Those are times that have gone by. And this century is a new time. This is a new time for partnerships. It's a new time to integrate and to learn from one another.
And that's how we thought it was all going to go, and what we hoped it would all go that way. And this was a little segment out of a three-part series called The West of the West. And
people will...
Oops, I've got to get on to the next one. Well, we built the ship after that, and it was a result of a vast investment of community labor and contributions. All in all, about, I want to say, half the skilled labor necessary to build the ship was volunteer labor, about 40% of the materials, and the skilled services were also donated. So it really was a product of our community and could not have been built without the community, without the identity that that powerful symbol evoked. But again, it was a powerful symbol. And herein sort of lies sort of the issue. You know, we built the ship, we launched it, it all seemed, but I will say that only almost accidentally did we avoid several major protests that had been organized around the launch of the ship, mainly because we couldn't launch it on time, because it was a miscalculation how much it weighed and everything else. So we ruined all these protests that people had set up inadvertently, and of course they upset us because of that, and we ended up launching the ship to a place where it wasn't convenient to hold a big protest. We didn't do that deliberately either, but in retrospect, it's glad it happened. But the net result of it was a lot of you know, a sense of response, not just among the Native community here, but among people that identify with them and identify with their point of view, and didn't see this as the same sort of origin story symbol. So for instance, I'm just going to read you several comments that were in the press. I'm not going to attribute it who these are to, but they're from Native Americans, from Kumeyaay, but they're also from people that weren't. I'm concerned about the absence of representation of the Kumeyaay people, or any Native Americans for that matter, on this project. Spain, Spain today resorts to giving Americans titles of nobility to prop up its sad legacy of destruction of Native peoples. Well, there's a couple of people in the room, including me, that might apply to, you know. It's not hard to do, including representation, include representation by the Kumeyaay. They, the Maritime Museum, are simply unwilling to provide educational classes and information to visitors that is balanced and truthful, okay? Now, we went out and got a grant, and so that students from Kumeyaay College could be there interpreting on the site, and we're there every day doing that. There were classes being given there on a regular basis, and we got funding for that. There was a considerable amount of representation, as you will see. It's not necessarily the case that the people that were writing this had ever been to the site and seen any of that, though. Settlers just want to celebrate a moment in history that brought them to this beautiful land. What's so wrong with that? Well, even if it's only in the past, I have a hard time forgetting the world's worst period of Holocaustal genocide. It's not in the past, it continues right now. The genocide continues, and the San Salvador is its propaganda in San Diego. So you can imagine it's not very pleasant to read things like that. The vessel is to be a replica of a ship built under brutal conditions with Indian slave labor under the command of the conquistador Juan Rodriguez Cabrillo. The project is an attempt to celebrate Spain's shipbuilding prowess and navigational skills, while ignoring that the original ship and many others were built in Guatemala using Indian slaves. Well, okay, so this particular bit of signage was one we had at the site from the minute we opened it, and it's there today at the San Salvador. It describes the Kumeyaay people and their territory, and a lot of stuff. It was written by tribal elders, by students from Kumeyaay College. These text panels, where they live, their homes, Kumeyaay Society food, also was a product of Kumeyaay College at our site and had been up all the time. And labor to build a ship, we didn't deviate from that. We explained that the encomienda system was a system often of forced labor. And that indeed, the ship probably, part of its construction was done with forced labor. And that in fact, on who's on board, is that there were servants on board. I don't know if slave is exactly the right word, because you couldn't sell them as a commodity to the degree you could in the American South. They were attached to the land, but the labor could still be forced. But we explained that as well as we could. When I say we, these were all written by students from Kumeyaay College. So we really didn't want to actually insert our own interpretation of this. We really saw the voice and the vision of the Kumeyaay people as we were presenting it. So we did our best in this respect. And sometimes when you are dealing with these symbols, it doesn't matter whether you do your best. Sometimes what is really important is the appropriation of the symbol and the use of it for the power it has to make the point you want to make. So when you actually go back and you do that, and you look at one of those comments about genocide, probably the most definitive book about genocide was written by Benjamin Madley, called American Genocide, and it was about what transpired in California from the time of the gold rush on. And it absolutely meets the textbook definitions of genocide as it's defined by the UN. However, it took place entirely with California as a state of the United States. In this thoroughly documented work on the subject, there is less than a paragraph about Cabrillo and the discovery of California and what took place. And that. So in an authoritative scholarly work, it really didn't, San Salvador really shouldn't be a factor. What could be is our other ship, the Californian, which is a replica of the Revenue Californian. The U.S. Revenue Service was at that time the only iteration of legal authority in California. And the job of the ship was to maintain law and order, stop smuggling, and also make sure that in places like San Francisco, where riots were really breaking out, that they didn't break out any more than they had to. In any case, the Californian did facilitate, the ship on which this was based, the Lawrence, by providing law and order and its reinforcement to Western society, did in fact, in its own way, contribute to those horrific episodes described in Madely's book. But the Californian isn't the symbol that gets chosen, right, to represent this, even though it is more directly connected. Because the Californian, although it's part of a narrative, in itself isn't an origin story any more than the Gold Rush is really an origin story. So the question is with this, then what do we make of this? And part of it is how we prepared, or how we tried to prepare the reaction to the ship when we left our area and went to other places. In Santa Barbara, or actually not Santa Barbara, in Channel Islands Harbor, we were welcomed by the Chumash, and these tribes don't often get, often they don't get along with each other. Welcomed by the Chumash, they brought their own boat, one of the really dramatic, beautiful Tomals. And suddenly it became like they're bringing their cool boat to hang out with us with our cool boat. And on the level of being sailors, we're all friends, And so there was an exchange of gifts and dinner and food and everything else. Now, on 2 occasions now, just last in August, we were also welcomed by the Selenians of Morro Bay, who made a big point of going out and welcoming the ship, bringing it in. They were part of the exhibits that we had when we were open to the public, and about 14,000 people saw their exhibits as well as saw the San Salvador. So we also, over the course of many years, have been trying to represent this history, as is our duty as a maritime museum. We documented this petroglyph, which may be the oldest representation, the earliest representation of an historic event in U.S. history, if it is indeed an Indian representation of the encounter with Cabrillo ships. It may well be, it may be something else that doesn't come with a caption. I put this picture in here because it's a powerful symbol, and it's taking place in a sacred location. I can't even reveal the exact location because it is supposed to be sacred. Before we could use this imagery, we had to get the permission of the tribes to use it, which we did. And documented it. We also make the point that this was a first encounter, and that the representation of this history began with the indigenous peoples who had contact actually before it began to be represented by the Europeans who wrote about what they saw. We also documented, our journal has, we devoted several issues to the notion that the Americas, the population of the Americas, was done many thousands of years earlier than it was first thought, long before the Folsom culture, not by ancient people chasing large-scale flora across the Bering Strait during an interglacial period, but through an epic marine series of epic marine voyages along what's called the Kelp Highway down the coast and into the rest of the Americas. So that the population of the Americas was a marine event, and a maritime endeavor was part of their origin story, just as it is for Europeans. We've also had contacts in telling the story and connecting with story with other indigenous peoples. For instance, we participated in the construction of a Chamorro canoe that we had on exhibit for about a year. When a series of voyaging canoes came across the Pacific Vaca, we hosted it during one of our festivals. And then back in 2018, we met the voyaging canoe Hikiani Alea at sea in the middle of the night just south of Dana Point, and towed them in with the San Salvador, and then we sailed together. So there's this Polynesian voyaging canoe sailing in company with a Spanish galleon, and it's on the Polynesian Voyaging Society website. And indeed, the legendary Voyager canoe, Hokulea, is visiting, only about 3 weeks or so, visiting San Diego, hosted by a museum. We're going to take the Star of India sailing, and Hokulea will be sailing with the Star of India. That's significant because Star of India is the last ship in existence, still operable, which once flew the flag of Hawaiian monarchy. So it's kind of a sacred moment for both organizations. So as we go through this, and we try to navigate our way through, what sort of lessons did we learn? What can we make of these efforts? Because it's proven not so easy to steer our way through it. And what I think is helpful to us is a couple things. One is that the author F. Scott Fitzgerald said that the mark of an intelligent person is they're capable of holding two opposite ideas in their head at the same time and still function. Okay? That's probably also the mark of an intelligent society. And as an intelligent society, we have the capacity of entertaining at one time and understanding at one time the complexity of the symbolism being evoked by something as powerful as a historic sailing ship. Another way I think it's helpful, for us anyway, is to understand the difference between a monument and a museum. So a monument is something that is placed onto the landscape, whether it's a headstone in a graveyard, or something like the Statue of Liberty, or the Cabrillo Monument, that tells people, that is a cue as to how people are supposed to think about something. So as Cabrillo is portrayed in that statue, he's staring nobly off into the distance like a great explorer. This bit of land is a national monument, its existence there, and this ship there, that is its identity piece, is designed to reflect a certain impression, a certain take, and produce the symbolism associated with it. And there is a big difference between monuments and museums, okay? Museums are not, they may be a building there, they're not supposed to tell you what to think about something. If they do their jobs, they're simply supposed to tell you to think, okay? That they are these sacred places where all points of view, all symbols as they oppose themselves, all representations of the past can be brought out and discussed in an atmosphere of mutual respect. And as such, they provide these little oases in our society where we can, for once, shed ourselves of the antagonism and the animosity and the hostility that seems to dominate so much of our public discourse today. To draw upon that, I'm going to use the Confederate flag as an example. As was shown earlier, at the time when the Confederate flag was front and center in our discussion of national symbols, it occurred after a young man draped himself in the Confederate flag and then went to a church and shot 6 people, killed them. And that started this whole discourse. At that time, President Obama said the Confederate flag doesn't belong on the top of the Capitol building or in a town square. It belongs in a museum. The operative word, it does belong in a museum. You don't make the symbol go away. You don't say it never happened. You don't pretend there weren't bad things associated with it. It's just you need this place where you can talk about this stuff in an atmosphere of mutual respect. And these sacred places have not changed over time. This was a sacred place on that rock out in the national wilderness where we're confronted with a symbol without being told what it's supposed to mean. And it leaves it up to us as to think about it. Not what to think about it, but to think about it. And so I guess what I'd like to close with about what we can make of these symbols is the Voyager canoe that will be on its way to San Diego in a few days, the Hokulea. The Hokulea just completed a circumnavigation of the Earth using ancient forms of navigation, sailing around the world without any modern instruments whatsoever, using the entirely sensual and visual cues of using stars and wave trains to navigate with, that the Polynesians used more than 1,000 years ago in exploring the largest area on the Earth ever to be occupied by single people speaking the same language, possibly one of the greatest intellectual achievements in human history. The Hokulea just circumnavigated the Earth. And if you think about it, the evolution of what we think about ancient forms of navigation, from they couldn't possibly have done, they were just drifting around on the ocean until they ran into islands, the fact that people 1,000 years ago, without instruments, without writing, without maps like and charts like we use, without the absolute reference system, without metallurgy, that they were able to do this enormous feat. And now the fact that everyone believes in it is really the triumph of human dignity when you get down to it. And this vessel, the Hokulea, has become a symbol of rejuvenation of the Hawaiian culture and also immense pride in the human dignity involved in that, just as the tomo is for the Chumash, and really just as the San Salvador is for us. Not all of us, but for many of us. And so what do we make of that? And I would like to suggest that the world right now, if you look at the news, is literally tearing itself apart with hostility and anger and resentment and war and appalling acts of cruelty. In contrast to that, this canoe sailed around the world in an effort to stitch it back together, and its only tool is a triumph of human dignity, right? And that is finally, I think, the way these symbols act most powerfully. So for our case, we can look through a telescope, and we look through a narrow one or a wide one. And we know that the symbols we choose, when we look through that at the past, are highly complex. They can mean opposite things, and both of those opposites be true. But hopefully, our ability to combine those and understand them, and deal with them in places of mutual respect, ensure what the Hokulea is trying to do by its voyages, and the San Salvador by its voyages, and the Star of India by its voyages, and ensure at the end that what we have as a result of the use of those symbols is the triumph of human dignity. And that's the end of my story. I don't have time for any questions. I probably went over. If I got
I have a question, and thank you so much. First, I want to thank you for this talk. It was marvelous, and I learned a lot of things, and I like the way you ended it. My question is, based on the example you gave us with the Confederate flag that belongs in a museum, do you think it would be then fair and a thing not for Spaniards that live in San Diego to be upset if they take away the symbol of the San Salvador from the
monument?
Not the monument so much, but from the, is it the flag of
city
San Diego?
law. The
From the
city,
flag of the city of San Diego.
Yes.
the-
What do you think? Then we shouldn't.
it's
have
the city
them?
seal. It
Right,
has
it's
in a
in
lot
the
of.
city.
Yes, the city seal.
I think you
Because
should.
it belongs-
I don't think you shouldn't be upset. I don't
If
think
they
you should.
take it away.
Yeah, I think if they take it away, that if it continues to be offensive to people, I think it's reflective of the concern. The thing is, we actually have in San Salvador, it is a museum, it's in a museum, it's a
Okay.
sacred place. I think that we've matured to where that use of the symbol, if it's done properly, I would say we've matured to the point where it superseded the use of it, in that city seal. So I wouldn't be upset by that.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
I have a question.
Yes.
So when the San Salvador was being built, and you look back at that process and everything that happened afterwards, what would you have done differently if you could go back?
Oh, that's a really good question. We would have been a little bit more prepared with this, I think, and we would have, some of the things we tried to do, it never materialized, maybe because we didn't put enough energy into it. The Park Service wrote at the site a narrative. They did a Park Service narrative of the history of the Age of Exploration and California's exploration and so forth. It was done by the historian at Cabrillo National Monument. And when we met with Kumeyaay, they didn't like that. I said, well, here's an opportunity. Why don't you construct the alternative to that you would like to say, and we'll run these two things in parallel. We'll let people do that. And they said, yeah, that's what we want to do because we want to tell our story. We don't want other people to. We want to tell our story. That's a really big deal. I just couldn't get them to do it. I just tried, and I guess I would have pestered them more, or said, you really need to do this. And we should have put, I think, more energy into that all along. That probably would have helped a lot. We just didn't predict the turn it was going to take because it had started off so nicely. We had a tribal elder who was on our board for several years. He was also on our faculty for a course we taught at NEH called Empires of the Wind. And he gave a really popular class in that. And so we thought we were doing everything, and the thing is that to the degree you can take a symbol and you can make it powerful, doesn't mean you own it. That same symbol can be appropriated by somebody else for the use that they want to make of it. And it can be equally powerful for another point of view. And so when you create these things, you have to understand that the thing you're creating may take on a life of its own. And so we didn't understand that completely, I think, when we started with it.
So you talked about the chairman, he showed the clip where he basically was not totally against it in his speech, but yeah, you also talked about there was protests going on at the same time. So is that because there was a split within the indigenous communities?
Well, there was so what happened during this time, so that, it was a statement of reconciliation that Chairman Pico gave, and so between that time, several things happened. Several prominent people who were foremost in advocates of reconciliation, they either left the scene, they retired as chairman and so forth, or they passed away. Jane Dumas, for instance, passed away. And there was another generation of people that followed them that I would say they weren't into reconciliation, they were really into conflict and conflict as a way of achieving their objectives in representing themselves, representing their point of view, and so forth. So there was a significant change, I think, especially amongst prominent people, among the Kumeyaay, as to what story they were going to tell and what was the most important story. And so people that were working with us suddenly just found it more difficult to do because it wasn't the narrative that was at that time the one that was important to them. So things change over time, as we've heard, the symbols change over time and the use you put to them can change.
So is that also tied to the fact that they've become more prosperous and with the casinos and the new generation has
Possibly, yeah.
more clout, so to speak,
Yeah,
so they
yeah.
can influence things?
It's interesting, while we were building the ship, there were constantly activities going through there that were organized. So one of them was this marathon walk run for a cause like leukemia or something like that. Anyway, it was a big one. And all these organizations were represented, all the Rotaries, Kiwanis, and so groups of 40 or 50 people were going through on this walk run, and they were raising money for this. I would say by far the most interested, courteous, and they just stopped and wanted to know all about it, was the Sequan group. When they came through, they just stopped what they were doing, they just wanted to tell us about this ship, this is really cool, what is this? We want to know about it. And nobody else just stopped and wanted to hear all about it, and our docents were talking to them and so forth. So that particular group, of course, was representing a highly successful enterprise. So I'm not sure what that, I'm not sure to the degree that has had its effect. It may have, but I'm not exactly sure how it's played out. All right. Okay then. Well, thank you.
I want to thank you, Ray. Thank you very much. This is amazing. It's a wonderful presentation. The same thing for Scott. Come over here. Scott has been working with the House Bay now for 2 years, trying to put this type of presentation. So Scott is helping us immensely, and he's the one that recruited Ray and the previous speakers, and also Dr. Iris Engström over here. So please give them a big, loud applause. And now, while we have thanks to Araceli and to Gemma and to Angelines, they brought